I was 34 years old the week I learned that a house, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a finished basement, and a deed bearing only my brother's name, could be given legally, completely, irrevocably, and still cost you your seat at his wedding. The amount on the closing disclosure was $287,000. I know because I signed it. I know because I am a real estate attorney, and I had drawn up every page of that transfer myself. They did not uninvite me because I did something wrong. They uninvited me because the bride found the deed. And when she found the deed, she found something on it that my brother had neglected to mention to anyone. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people read the fine print, and family learns that a gift is not the same as a blank check. If you believe that documentation is a form of self-defense, drop a comment below and subscribe. You are going to want to be here for this one. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I do for a living, and what I do is read documents for a living. I have been a real estate attorney for 9 years. Before that, I was a paralegal for 4. I have read deeds, easements, promissory notes, quitclaim filings, and subordination agreements until the language stopped being language and started being geometry. Shapes on a page that either hold or they don't. My job is to know which. I tell you this not to impress you. I tell you this because my family spent 34 years confusing my quietness with inattention. They saw a woman who didn't argue much and decided she didn't notice much either. They were incorrect. My brother Tarek is 3 years younger than me. When we were children, he was the one who filled rooms, loud at dinner, funny at funerals, the one our parents pointed to when they wanted to show something off. I was the one who did the dishes while they were still pointing. I was the one who showed up at the hospital at 2 a.m. when my father had his cardiac event, stayed through the morning, filed the insurance paperwork from the waiting room, and drove home to shower and go directly to work. Nobody pointed at that. Our mother ran the family on a ledger only she could see, and the columns were not equal. Tarek received. I was the column labeled, "She can handle it." I absorbed tuition loans he defaulted on, covered the shortfall on my parents' car when the dealer wouldn't budge, showed up every Christmas with an envelope that was never discussed because discussing it would have meant acknowledging it. I did not mind most of the time, or I had learned not to mind in a way that felt the same as not minding. Then Tarek met Priya. Priya was not a bad person in the beginning. She was ambitious in the way that people are when they grow up without a safety net and have decided they will never be without one again. I recognized that quality. It was familiar. What I did not recognize was what it looked like pointed at me. They had been together 2 years when the conversation happened. It was a Sunday. My mother had made biryani. My father was watching something on his phone. Tarek sat across from me at the kitchen table and said the words that I have replayed so many times they have worn a groove. "Nadia, we need a place. Something real. Priya's pregnant." I looked at him. He looked at the table. He said Priya wanted to live somewhere permanent before the baby came. He said they'd been looking. He said everything in their price range needed work they couldn't afford. He said it the way he always said things, sideways with his hands in his lap, as if the ask were already embarrassing him. My mother said, "Nadia, you have that property." I did have that property. I had purchased it 3 years earlier as an investment, finished the basement myself on weekends over 14 months, rented it for 2 years, and had it sitting vacant while I decided whether to sell or keep renting. I said I would think about it. I thought about it for 6 weeks. I ran the numbers. I had the property appraised at $287,000. I spoke to my tax attorney. I drew up a gift deed, a legal instrument that transfers real property with no consideration, no repayment, no lien. I gave my brother a house. The closing happened on a Thursday in March. Tarek signed. I notarized. We had lunch afterward. He said thank you. I said of course. He hugged me in the parking lot and I stood in it, and I drove home, and I sat in my kitchen for a while without turning on any lights. 3 months later, Priya lost the pregnancy. I sent flowers. I called. I got a voicemail. 6 months after that, they were engaged. I was not told directly. My mother mentioned it while describing the wedding plans. Past tense already. as if my knowing were incidental. I said I was happy for them. I meant it. I bought a dress in January. It was the right color for a daytime outdoor ceremony. I had it altered. I made travel arrangements because the wedding was in a city 4 hours away. I did everything a sister does. The invitation arrived in February. I have it. Keep it in a file. It is cream-colored with gold foil lettering, and it has my name on the envelope in my mother's handwriting. I have the envelope too. 2 weeks later, my mother called on a Tuesday evening at 7:14 p.m. I remember the time because I had just sat down after finishing a closing brief. I looked at my phone, picked it up, and my mother said in the voice she uses when she has rehearsed something, "Nadia, Priya doesn't feel comfortable with you attending." I said, "What?" My mother said, "It's a sensitive time. She has her reasons. We think it's better." I said, "Better for whom?" Silence. Then, "You know how she can be." I said, "Tell me specifically what reason she gave." My mother said, "She's emotional. She doesn't want conflict." I said, "What conflict?" My mother did not answer that question. She said that they hoped I would understand. She said that Tariq had agreed it was best. She said the word family 4 times in 2 minutes, each time in a way that implied I was not quite in it. I said, "Okay." My mother said, "You're not upset?" I said, "I'll talk to you soon, Mama." I hung up the phone. I set it down on the kitchen table. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the county property records portal, something I do reflexively the way other people check the weather, and I looked at the deed I had filed 11 months earlier. I already knew what I would find. I had drafted the document, but I looked anyway because looking at a thing is different from knowing it. The deed was recorded. My name appeared as grantor. Tariq's name appeared as grantee. The property address was there. The transfer amount was listed as $0, a gift. And then below Tariq's name in the section for grantee marital status, in the box I had left intentionally blank at his request because he had said, "We're not married yet, it should just be my name." The box was blank. The property had been titled solely to Tariq. I had done exactly what he asked. And somewhere between that Thursday in March and this Tuesday in February, Priya had found the deed. I closed the laptop. I made tea. I did not sleep well that night. And in the morning I went to work and I drafted a letter to a client about an encroachment dispute, and I did not think about the wedding or the dress or my mother's voice or the word family until I was in my car at 6 p.m. Then I pulled up my notes app. And I began to write down everything. Dates, times, dollar amounts, exact words. It is a habit. My profession made it a habit, and now I do it the way other people bite their nails. I wrote down the Sunday conversation at the kitchen table. I wrote down the closing date. I wrote down the phone call at 7:14 p.m. I wrote down what my mother said and what she did not say when I asked for a specific reason. I wrote down a number I had been carrying in the back of my mind for 3 years. $287,000. I saved the document. I closed my phone. Then I called my colleague Sunita, who handles estate and property litigation, and I said, "Can I come in and talk something through with you as a private matter?" She said yes. Sunita's office smells like good coffee and old paper. She has been practicing longer than I have, and she is the kind of attorney who listens with her whole face. I sat across from her desk and I told her about the gift deed. I told her about the call. I told her about Priya. Sunita leaned back in her chair. She said, "You filed a gift deed." I said, "Yes." She said, "Solely in his name." I said, "He asked." I complied. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you know why Priya is uncomfortable with you at the wedding?" I said, "I have a theory." She said, "Tell me." I said, "I think she found the deed. I think she saw that the property is titled only to Tariq. I think in jurisdictions where marital property law applies that matters a great deal, and I think she knows it matters. The house is not marital property. It was a gift made before they married, titled solely to the grantee. In our state, It remains his separate property even after marriage unless he takes action to add her. Sunita looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "She's angry because she found out you gave her future husband a house she has no legal claim to." I said, "That would be my reading." She said, "Did you do that on purpose?" I looked at her. I said, "He asked me to put only his name on the deed. I put only his name on the deed. I am a real estate attorney. I filed what he asked me to file." Sunita nodded slowly. She said, "And now?" I said, "Now I want to understand my options. Not because I want to take anything back. The gift was real. The house is his. But I want to understand what the family thinks they are doing, and what they think will happen." She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she said, "I think they believe that if they pressure you enough, you'll either demand the property back, which you can't legally do, or you'll feel guilty enough to help them with something else." I said, "They want me to add her to the deed." She said, "That would be my guess. And they think the way to get that is to make you desperate enough for inclusion that you'll do it to buy your way back in." I sat with that for a while. I said, "They uninvited me from his wedding to pressure me into transferring $250,000 of real property to a woman I've met 11 times. Sunita said, "That's one way to read it." I said, "Is there another way?" She didn't answer. I drove home. I sat in the parking lot of my building for 19 minutes. I know because I looked at the clock when I parked and again when I got out. Then I went inside and I pulled out my copy of the gift deed, the original, the one with my notary stamp, and I put it in a folder. I labeled the folder. I put it on my desk. I did not call my mother. I did not call Tariq. I waited. If you have ever watched someone hand their family something irreplaceable, time, money, a roof over their heads, and then had that family turn around and use it as leverage, you already know the particular silence that follows. Not the silence of not knowing what to say. The silence of knowing exactly what to say and deciding to wait for the right moment to say it. Stay with me. They came in stages. First it was my mother, 3 days after the call, who sent a message asking if I had thought about things. I replied that I had. She sent a voice note. Her voice in the voice note was softer than it had been on the phone. The voice she uses when she is feeling out whether the situation requires softness or pressure, like a thumb against a bruise. I transcribed the voice note into my notes app, word for word. Then it was Tariq 8 days later. He came to my apartment on a Saturday morning without calling ahead. He rang the bell. I let him in. He sat on my couch and looked at the rug and said that Priya was upset. He said she felt like I had done something intentional. I said, "The deed." He said, "Yes." I said, "Tariq, you asked me to put only your name on it." He said, "I know. But she didn't know I'd asked you that. She thinks you did it to cut her out." I said, "Does she know what a gift deed is?" He said, "She knows what it means for her if we split up." I let that sentence sit for a moment. Then I said, "Are you planning to split up?" He said, "No, obviously. But she wants to feel secure." I said, "She wants to be added to the deed." He said, "Nadia, I'm asking you as my sister." I said, "No." He looked up. He was not expecting no. He had been expecting a conversation that ended with me agreeing. They always did before. I said, "The house was a gift. I gave it to you. What you do with it is between you and your wife, including whether you add her to the title. That is a decision for you to make. I am not the obstacle here." He said, "She doesn't see it that way." I said, "What does she see?" He said, "She sees a woman who gave her husband a house and kept all the legal control for herself." I said, "The dinner was at my parents' house. The dining table had been extended, which it only is for large occasions. Priya's mother sat at one end. Her father sat beside her. Tariq and Priya sat across from each other, not beside each other, which I noticed. My mother had made a lamb dish that takes 4 hours. The effort was deliberate. I sat at the far end. I put the folder on the chair beside me. Nobody mentioned the folder for 40 minutes. We ate. Priya's mother said things about the wedding venue. Tariq told a story about the hotel block. My father said very little. He is a man who has spent his life letting my mother run the room, and tonight she was running it. Then over dessert my mother looked at me and said, Nadia, we wanted to come together tonight because Priya and her family had some questions about the house, about the gift, and about why the paperwork was done the way it was done. Priya's father said, We only want to understand. His English was careful and deliberate, and behind it was the structure of a man who had run a business for decades. He was not unkind. He was assessing. I said, I would be happy to explain. May I? My mother gestured as though granting permission. I opened the folder. I said, In March of last year, I transferred a property to my brother Tariq via a gift deed, a legal instrument for transferring real property with no monetary consideration. The deed was filed with the county recorder's office and is a matter of public record. I have a certified copy here. I placed it on the table. At Tariq's request, the deed named only him as grantee. I drafted the deed myself, as I am a licensed real estate attorney. There was no ambiguity about whose name would be on it. Tariq asked and I complied. Priya's father looked at Tariq. Tariq looked at his plate. Priya's mother said, Priya told us the house was a wedding gift. For both of them. I said. The closing occurred 11 months before the engagement. At the time Tariq told me Priya was pregnant, and they needed a stable home. Silence. I said. The property was transferred before their relationship status changed. Whether Tariq chooses to add Priya to the title after their marriage is entirely within his power. That decision belongs to him, not to me. Priya said for the first time all evening. You knew what you were doing. Her voice was not loud. It was controlled in the way that controlled voices are when they are covering something underneath. I looked at her directly. I said, I filed what my brother asked me to file. She said, You're a lawyer. You knew what it would mean for me. I said, I knew what it would mean legally, yes. I was not thinking about leverage. I was thinking about my brother's request. She said, How convenient. I said, Priya, I gave your fiancé a house worth $287,000. I did not attach conditions. I did not ask for repayment. I did not insert myself into your marriage. I drew up a clean gift deed and I filed it and I had lunch with him after and I went home. If you believe that was an act of aggression, I am not sure what I can say to change your mind. Her mother said quietly, Is there a way to fix the deed? I said, Tariq can add Priya to the title at any time. It is a simple process. He has always had that ability. I have never been an obstacle to it. Tariq said nothing. He was still looking at his plate. My mother said, Nadia, we only want the family to feel whole. I said, Whole? I let the word sit for a moment. You called me 2 weeks ago and told me I was no longer welcome at my brother's wedding. You had received an invitation. I had it altered. I had made travel arrangements. Priya's father looked at my mother. My mother did not look back at him. I said, I would like to read something. I reached into the folder and withdrew the letter. Not the copy, the original in my grandmother's handwriting, transcribed by my cousin. I had brought a translation on a separate page. I said, My grandmother Zora passed away 4 years ago. In her last lucid year, she wrote letters to her grandchildren. I want to read one line from mine. Nobody said stop. I read. The person who holds the receipt is not the one who is small. She is the one who is paying attention. I put the letter down. I said, I have been paying attention for a very long time. I looked at my mother. I said, You raised me to show up. I showed up. I showed up at the hospital at 2 a.m. and filed the insurance forms. I covered the car loan in 2019. I absorbed Tariq's tuition shortfall in 2017. I gave him a house 11 months ago. I have shown up in every way available to me, and this is the first time I have ever said that out loud, and I am saying it now only because you used the word whole, And I want you to understand what whole costs. Priya's mother had placed her hand over her husband's. Tarek had looked up. My mother's face was doing something I had not seen it do before. Not anger. Something older than anger. I said, I am not here to take the house back. The gift was real and it is irrevocable and I would not take it back even if I could. But I will not be managed. I will not be disinvited from my brother's wedding, and then invited to a dinner where the expectation is that I'll quietly paper over the insult in exchange for being allowed back in. That is not how I work, Priya said. Then what do you want? I said. An acknowledgement. From Tarek. Not from you, not from our mother. From him. Tarek was quiet for a long moment. The table waited. He said, I should have told Priya what I asked you to do with the deed. I should have been honest with her from the beginning. Priya looked at him. Her expression shifted in a way that was private, between the two of them, and I did not look at it for long. He said, and I should not have agreed to uninvite you. My mother said, Tarek. He said, Mama, she gave me a house. The least she deserves is a seat at my wedding. I reached into the folder one last time. I set a single page on the table in front of my mother. It was the original invitation, the cream one with the gold foil. My name on the envelope in her handwriting. I said, I kept it. Then I stood up, picked up my folder. I said good night to Priya's parents, who both nodded with the careful respect of people reassessing a situation. I looked at my mother. I looked at Tarek. I did not look at Priya. I walked out. The wedding was on a Saturday in April. I wore the gray dress. The ceremony was held in a garden with paper lanterns and the smell of jasmine, and Tarek cried at the altar, which surprised nobody who has ever known him. I sat in the third row. After the reception, I drove 4 hours home and arrived at 2 a.m. I sat in my kitchen and made tea, the same way I had on the night my mother called, and I thought about the folder on my desk and the letter in its fireproof box and the certified copy of the gift deed that is, as of this recording, still filed with the county recorder's office in Tarek's name alone. He never added Priya to the deed. I never asked him why. What I know is this. The property appraised at $303,000 last fall. Whatever they decide to do with it is their business. It was always their business. My mother called 3 weeks after the wedding to say that Priya had apologized. She said it the way she says things she is not sure she fully means, carefully from a distance. I said I was glad. I meant it. Priya's parents sent a note, handwritten on good stationery. It said, your family is fortunate to have someone who keeps their word. Kept it. It is in the folder behind the deed. The entitlement did not disappear. Entitlement never disappears entirely. It recalibrates. My mother still calls and says, we only want the family to feel whole, in that same voice, and I still hear it for what it is. But she has not asked me to sign anything since April. And Tarek has not looked at his plate at a family dinner since October. The letter from my grandmother sits in its fireproof box. The deed sits in the county records. The folder sits on my desk. I did not do this for revenge. Revenge implies I wanted something returned that was taken. Nothing was taken. I gave freely and I documented what I gave. And when the people I gave it to confused my generosity with an obligation, I simply placed the documentation on a table and let it speak. My grandmother spent 31 years in a government records office. She understood something about paper and permanence that the rest of the family missed. Calm is not the same thing as weak. My family had confused the two my entire life. They understand it better now. If this story reminded you that showing up is a gift, not a given, that documentation is not coldness but clarity, and that the person who holds the receipt is not the one who is small, take that with you. Tell it to someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment about the moment you stopped explaining yourself to people who weren't listening. Hit subscribe and I will see you in the next one.